Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. In today's video, we're going to be creating the wires that you're looking at right now. They're going to fall down from the sky and kind of entangle around each other and just kind of bounce there for a little while. We're going to be doing this using a cloner. We're going to clone some spheres along a spline or along a few splines, and then we're going to be connecting those spheres using soft body dynamics. So let's get started on this. Here we go. So we start by creating a helix, and we're going to set the start radius to 50 and the same with the end radius. Now we can increase the height to about 750, and let's bring up the start angle as well, so that something like -251, and then the end angle we can bring to about 1135, just so we can get a few loops and both of our end points are going to be pointing up. So that's what we're aiming for as well, just when it comes to hanging up our wires or giving them a place to remain still, those points will be pointing up. Let's duplicate this helix, hold down control, and let's just drag one out. Let's rotate that on your keyboard to get your rotate tool. Rotate it by 180 degrees, hit space to go back to your previously selected tool, and let's just bring this back. We want to kind of put that in the middle there, so it looks something like this. And again, both the points, this is a duplicate of helix, so both the points are going to be pointing up. Okay, now we're going to have the wire, or we're going to create the spline that's going to go from, well, I'm going to hop into my right view here. Let's just bring these helixes into the center of our scene. So we're going to create the main wire. I'm calling it the main wire. So it's going to be a spline that's going to go from about here, and it's going to stretch and loop through these helixes and end about here. So let's get our pen tool, and let's just add a vertex there, and let's come over here, and then we're just going to click and drag to achieve a nice curve in our spline. Then hit escape on your keyboard once you're happy with it, and let's middle mouse click to hop back into perspective. So you can see that that's just traveling right through both of our helixes there. Okay, so now we're going to create the cloner that's going to clone some spheres along this spline. So let's go to MoGraph Cloner, and let's create a sphere and make it a child of the cloner. Set the radius to be about 12 centimeters, and the segments can also be set to 12. So now we want the cloner's mode to be set to object, and now it's going to ask us for an object to clone along, so we're going to be using this spline that we just created. I'm going to rename this to main wire. This one can be red wire, and this one can be yellow, green wire. Okay, so main wire is going into the object field, so just drag that into it. Now our spheres are going to be cloned along that spline. So let's go into our cloner settings here, and in the object tab we're going to set the distribution to even, and we can bring that up to about 70 so that our spheres are just kind of touching each other. And then we're going to create another cloner. Let's just drag this one down, and we can call this main wire. So let's create another cloner, MoGraph Cloner, and we can bring that down. That's going to be called red wire. And then this one is going to be yellow, green wire. Now you might be wondering why I didn't just duplicate this cloner here so that I already have spheres set up, and the reason being is just because when I've been doing that, Cinema 4D has been giving me some unusual results, so I'm kind of avoiding cloning stuff until I figure out what's going on with that. So we have our red wire red wire cloner and our yellow green wire cloner, so we'll deal with those in a minute. First, we can set up the dynamics for our main wire cloner. So let's right click and go to simulation tags. Let's add a rigid body tag. Now with your rigid body tag selected, go to the dynamics tab, actually your collision tab, sorry, and let's turn off self collisions. Set the inherit tag here to apply tag to children so that the tag is going to be applied to the children. And we're also going to set individual elements to top level. Now if we hit, let's add in a floor before we hit play. Bring that down. We'll add a collider tag to it. And let's make that invisible. Hold down Alt, double click on your traffic lights. Not called traffic lights. Now I'll hit play. You can see that the dynamics is doing its thing there. There's no self collisions, but our spheres are all separate objects and we want them all to be connected with tiny springs that we can control the properties of. So to do that, we're just going to hop into our collision tag here, our rigid body tag, and then we're going to go to the soft body tab, and now we're going to set the soft body mode here to made of clones. Now you can see that they're all joined together and they look like a kind of a rope or something like that. Just going to press NB on my keyboard and see to show lines. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change some of the settings here in my rigid body tag. So collision, you've already done this, make sure you have. Turn off self collisions. Let's bring the bounce down to 0. Friction we can bring up to 1500 and that's fine. For the force we're going to set the angular damping to 100%, and that's just going to prevent rotation of our spheres. And soft body, we're going to be making some changes to this, but for now we'll just work on our second and third cloner, red wire and yellow green wire. So for red wire we're going to need another sphere, and we can make it a child of red wire. Let's set the radius to be 6, we'll say 6 NA to turn off your lines. And we want the red wire cloner to clone these spheres along the red wire helix. Let's just drag, before we do that we need to set it to object, and then we can drag the red wire helix down to the object field. Again we need to set distribution to even, and we can bring up the count to about 110. Maybe we'll go 120. Let's do the same for our yellow-green wire. So we need a sphere again, and we can set the radius. Let's just make it a child of yellow-green wire. Let's set the radius here to be, let's go for 9 on this one, maybe 10. And we can set the segments down to 11 on that, and make sure you do the same with the other one as well. So I'm just going to have a look at my segments. Hit NB in your keyboard. That's fine. I'm going to turn off my lines with NA. Cool. Okay, so we just again need to set the cloner mode here to object, and it's going to be cloning these spheres along the the yellow-green wire. Set the distribution here again to even, and let's bring up the clones to 120. The count up to 120. Okay, so now we can copy this dynamics tag down to red wire. Hold down control and just drag it down and release. Do the same to yellow green wire. Now if we hit play, it's going to react with our floor. Remember we have a floor hidden in our scene. So if we hit play, so all of our clones well, we'll say the main wire clones are behaving as one single wire, so as are the red wire clones and the yellow-green wire, because we just duplicated the dynamics tab from main wire. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that these aren't going to fall to the ground. So to do that, we need to turn off dynamics for this sphere and this sphere. So how do we do that? Select your main wire cloner, and let's go to MoGraph and MoGraph selection. Now we can select the last point and, well, the last point and the first point in our clones, and we can grab our new MoGraph selection tag and hit invert. That's going to invert the selection. Now we can simply drag this tag down into the dynamics tab of our collider, what is it, rigid body tag. So let's do that now. Drag down the MoGraph selection tag into the MoGraph selection field and release. So now we're only going to be getting dynamics in the selected points, and if you remember, that's everything except for this point and this point. So if we hit play, you can see that our points are not moving, which is great. So let's go and do the same for red wire cloner here and the yellow green wire cloner here. So I'm just selecting the first and last points, select my new MoGraph selection tag, and then click invert. Now with the selection, we can select our dynamics tag and just drag down this newly created MoGraph selection tag into the MoGraph selection field. Cool, let's check that out. And now we have to do it with our yellow-green wire cloner here. So again, we can just grab our MoGraph selection tool from our previously selected tools here. Let's select the last point and the first point. Then we're going to do an invert on that selection. And then we can drag this MoGraph selection down into the MoGraph selection field. Now if we hit play there, all of our ropes or our wires are tied up by their points. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to get rid of the, well, I'm going to lower the floor just so we can see what this is going to do. Okay, so already that's looking pretty good. We haven't actually tweaked our soft body properties yet, so looks like we got a lucky break on that one. So let's increase our frame range and see what it does given time. So it looks like it's kind of losing grip and just falling through. The geometry is collapsing, and also it's starting to sway uncontrollably the further we go down the timeline. So let's see if we can fix those issues now. So I'm going to go into my main wires dynamics tag and go into the soft body tab, and let's increase the structural here to be 300 and see what that does for us. So it seems like we've fixed the problem of the wires falling through each other, so that's good. Just changing the structural seems to have done that for us. And I think that that's good enough for our soft body settings. I think I'm going to leave everything else as is. So the next we're going to do is create the actual wires, the geometry that make up the wires. So we're going to use a tracer object to do that, and we can use that to connect all of our spheres along the spline, and then we can create geometry from that using a sweep object. So I'm just going to select my main wire cloner first of all, and the reason I'm doing that is so that when I create a tracer object, you'll see that the main wire cloner is automatically going to be added into the trace link field there. So if you don't click on the cloner first of all, then you'll have to do that manually. But yeah, so once you have that done, I'm just going to bring this down closer to my main wire cloner, and I want to set the tracing mode here to connect all objects. Now you can see we're going to get this connection between each of our clones. And so we want to get the geometry, so I'm just going to turn off my grid for 1 second, actually for the rest of this tutorial. And next we're going to create the sweep object that is going to sweep some geometry along our tracer. So let's make the tracer a child of our sweep. Let's call this sweep main wire. And now we can create a circle spline, and we're going to tell the main wire sweeper to sweep this circle spline along our tracer object. And now we are getting our geometry. So we can set the radius of this based off of the radius of our sphere in our main wire. So we set that to 12, so we can do the same for our circle spline here. Just set that to 12. And we're going to get a wire the same thickness as our sphere is going along. Now that doesn't matter, but it's just so that I can well, actually it kind of does matter, because the thickness or the radius of the spheres is going to affect how the dynamic objects actually react to each other. So for example, if I set this pretty high, you're going to get some intersections there of the geometry. So I'll set that back to 12. And I'm going to press NB on my keyboard to turn on my lines. Let's see what we got here. So we need to get more segments basically. So select your tracer object and set the type to B-spline and the intermediate points to uniform. So that's going to give us more segments. We're going to get a smoother piece of geometry there. N8 to turn off your lines. And now let's see what we're going to get with that. Okay, so eventually at the end we'll just hide off all of our cloners, so we're not going to see them messing with our scene. But we'll do that at the very end. So now I'm going to create another sweep object and another trace. I'm going to do that for each of my cloners. I'm not going to be duplicating again because, as I mentioned before, I'm getting some weird issues with Cinema 4D when I duplicate stuff. So it could be just something that I'm doing wrong in the settings, I don't know, but I'll figure it out for the next time. But yeah, I'm going to create a tracer object for this red wire cloner. So I'm going to select the red wire cloner first, go to MoGraph, and then I'm going to grab a tracer object. Let's bring this down closer to the red wire here. And I'm going to set the tracing mode here to connect all objects. And now I'm going to create a sweep object for this tracer. So I'm just going to hold down Alt, and that'll automatically add the tracer as a child to the sweep as long as the tracer is selected. So just hold down Alt to do that. And we need a circle spline also. We can make that a child of the sweep. And I'm going to call this sweep red wire. So now we have a main wire sweep, we have a red wire sweep. We need to fix the radius of this. So the red wire cloner, let's see, where is it? It's here. The sphere here, the radius is set to 6. I'm going to do the same with the red wire circle spline. And now let's set up our tracer for our yellow-green wire. So I'm just going to bring this down to the bottom here to try and keep everything organized. And with this cloner object selected, go to MoGraph and let's add a tracer object. Just drag that down. And now you'll see that the tracer link is also automatically set up with the yellow-green wire cloner. So let's set the tracing mode here again to connect all objects, and then we can hold down Alt and grab a sweep object. And we're going to need a circle spline as well. We can make that a child of the sweep. I'm going to call this sweep yellow green wire. And let's set the radius of this circle spline to be 10 to match up with our sphere in our yellow green wire. Okay, so let's see what that does for us. Okay, so I'm getting an issue here with this wire. It's not actually moving, maybe because I have it selected, I don't know, possibly, we'll see. No, so we're gonna have to make do with just visualizing this using the cloner that is there for the, I believe it's the red wire. Yeah. No, it's not the red wire. I think it might be the... Okay, so when we pause it, it seems to snap in. But you can see when we're playing, it's not updating in real time. And that is the... Bear with me 2 seconds. Yeah, so that's the yellow-green wire. It's giving us the trouble there. So yeah, we're just going to have to visualize this using the cloner for the yellow-green wire. Because I'm getting an issue here with my geometry. It's not playing properly. The animation or the simulation isn't calculating properly in the viewport. It's only when we pause it that it is updating. Now you guys might not be getting the same problem. Please let me know if you know the solution to that. Okay, so we need to first of all NB in your keyboard to show lines. Let's zoom in here. So you can see that in our main wire we have a lot of segments, but in our yellow, green and red wires not so much. So we need to just go to our red wire first of all, grab our tracer object, set the type here to B-spline and the intermediate points to uniform. So we're getting a bit of smoothness there. We can turn off the red wire cloner, hold down Alt and double click on your visibility, I don't know the name of those, I'm going to say traffic lights. And for the yellow wire, yellow green wire, we can do the same as well. Not on the sweep object, but on the cloner object. And we need to grab our tracer object in our yellow green wire, sweep, and set the type here to B-spline and the intermediate points to uniform again to smoothen out that geometry. NA in your keyboard, turn off your lines, and let's see what that is looking like. I'll turn off the clones here for the main wire cloner. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. So what we have left to do is just to create some materials for our wires. So let's do that now. Let's double click in our materials panel here and let's open that up. And we can call this, we'll call this main wire. It's going to be black, so we could have called it black wire, but we have it called main wire over here. So main wire it is. Going to go for kind of a grayish black color, and jump into the reflectance channel, and we can bring down the width of this default specular. Bring it down. Let's increase the inner width a little bit and bring up the specular strength, so to about 27% on that, give or take, and let's just apply that to our main wire. Now Control R on your keyboard to do a render preview, so that's on the wrong object. That should be on our main wire sweep object, not on our cloner. Okay, so I'm going to use my interactive render viewer. Hit Alt R on your keyboard to bring that up. And let's increase the quality on that. So it's not going to update our troublesome wire there. That's going to stay up there. So that's fine for now. So I'm going to reduce the width a little bit on that. So I'm bringing it down to about 26%. We're going to have to create some lights because we haven't actually done that yet. So before we go ahead and create the materials for our red wire and our yellow and green wire, we can create some lights. So let's create a light, and we can jump into our top view. Let's actually stay in the four-way view there. And let's bring this forward a bit. We need to turn on shadows. So we're getting our shadows there now. We can bring it, let's see, from our right view. Let's bring it over to the left. And we'll bring it forward a bit more along the X. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's go into the general tab of our light, and we can color this up a bit to be a bit warmer. So a bit of a yellow tint on it. And let's bring the shadow density down to maybe 85%. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we have one light for now. We'll just call that our key. And we'll see later on if we want to add a fill light and a rim light. So for now, we just have the one. Let's create some more materials for our wires. So double click in your materials panel. Let's open up that new material. And now we can call this red wire. And let's go, actually, scrap that. Let's delete this off, and we can duplicate this. Then we don't have to adjust our specular settings again. So we can just keep the specular settings from our main wire and then just change the color of this duplicate, and also change the name to red wire. And let's make this red. So I'm going to go for something like this, something like that. So these are my RGB values if you want to copy them, or you can eyeball it yourself. And I'm going to apply this to my red wire sweep, which is there. Okay, cool. And now we need another material. So we're going to duplicate the red one, hold down Control, and now let's open that up. This is going to be our yellow green wire. And for color, we're going to use a gradient. And we're going to have a yellow knot. Something like this. It's kind of orange, maybe a bit more yellow, like that. And then for this knot, we're going to go green. Something like that. So whatever green and yellow you fancy, let's create two knots there, a green and a yellow one. Now let's just drag this over closer to the yellow one. And now what we can do now is right click in our gradient bar here and just use the double knots function. So that'll create two more knots. We can go again, and we can go one more time. And now we can right click again and use the distribute knots, and that'll space everything out evenly. So let's apply this to our wire. So our troublesome red or yellow green wire is actually not going to render properly for us in the interactive render region. So let's close the interactive render region, Alt R on your keyboard. And now let's use Control R to see our render as it's going to be. So let's drag this yellow green wire material to our yellow green wire sweep. And let's do a Control R again on that. Okay, so it's all looking pretty good. We still don't have a fill in there. Let's put one in. I'm going to jump into my top view, and I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to duplicate this light, and I'm going to drag it over to about here. This is going to be our fill. And I'm going to turn off shadows for this. In your shadow tab, turn off shadows. And I'm going to give this a kind of a bluish color, a very light blue color. Now let's jump back into our perspective, Control R, and see what that looks like. So I'm going to turn this off. and do Control R again, turn it back on. So I think I actually prefer it without the fill, to be honest, getting rid of that. And I'm going to see if it's going to look good with a rim light. So a light that's just going to be hovering above our objects. So I just Control duplicated that over there. Let's call this rim. And let's turn off the shadow again. And let's bring the color to white for this one. We can bring the intensity down as well to about 40%. Probably should have done that with the fill, but I forgot. Anyway. Let's bring up our interactive render region, Alt-R on your keyboard. Now let's turn off the rim. So we're getting a little bit more brightness. Let's reposition this. Now let's turn this on and off. So you can see the difference that is making, a very slight difference. So I'm going to leave it on, and I'm going to turn off my interactive render region, Alt-R on your keyboard, and use Control-R to do a render preview. Okay, so that's looking all looking pretty good. The last thing we want to do is add a texture to our red wire. So it's like a little product code or whatever, you know, those numbers you see on wires. So I'm going to create a new material. I'm going to open it up. Let's call it code. And I'm going to turn off reflectance. In the color channel, I'm going to load in my code image, and it's basically just a code, a number that is vertical. You'll be able to download this from the description below. You can make one yourselves. Alternatively, just make sure that it is a PNG file that you're saving out. Say no to that. And we also need to load this into our alpha, so that we're going to remove everything except for the code itself. So let's load that in. No again. Now you can see we have our code and nothing else but our code. So the alpha channel is doing its magic there. Now we can apply that to our red wire. You're going to see it's going to appear over here. And now we just need to resize this using our length and our length U and length V settings here. So I'm going to bring the length U down, and the length V I'm going to bring down also. And we don't want this to tile, so turn that off. Now we need to just find our... There it is. I can see it there. You might not be able to see it. It's appearing there. So I just needed to find where it was. It was hiding behind the red wire. So I just needed to use my offset settings, offset U and offset V, to find it basically. And you guys are going to have to do the same. So let's see. We want to reduce the length of this, or reduce the length V for this, so it's not as long. Let's bring it up to about here, we'll say. And let's do Control R to see what that's looking like. I'm going to make it smaller again because it's a bit big. So I'm making it smaller, and then I need to find it again. Now that's too small. So I'm undoing that. Just a little tiny bit smaller. And the same for length V. I'm going to go down to about 2%. Control R again. Okay, so that's looking a bit better. You can't really read it, to be honest, so you might say it's a bit pointless. You guys are welcome to make your one bigger if you wish. So I'm just going to leave that there, and I'm going to duplicate this tag, hold down Control, and just drag, and now we have another one that we can move around. So I'm going to put another one maybe here, and I'm going to do another one, hold down Control, and I'm just going to move this somewhere. So it's disappeared, it's gone behind the wire, so I'm going to use my offset use property here to change that and find it. So I can see it's appearing there. I'm going to leave that there. Okay, cool. So I'm happy enough with that. The only thing I'm not happy with is, let's see, well, if you look along our wires there, it's looking very bumpy. And the reason for that is our soft body settings. It's kind of pulling our spheres together. So it's kind of looking a bit clumpy and bumpy along the wires. So let's fix that. So we need to jump into our red wire dynamics tag and also our yellow-green wire, because that's where the problems are actually visible. And just hold down Control as you're selecting them so that we can edit both of them at the same time. Now let's go into our soft body tag and let's change flexion down to about 25. Let's see what that does for us. So straight away that's causing another issue in that I'll just pause that. Our red wire has actually passed through the main wire, so that's not good. But to fix that, what we can do is bring structural up to 200. Let's see if that solves our problem. So it's not gone through, that's great, that's fixed the problem. And if we pause that now and do a Control R on that, it's a bit less bumpy. I might go a bit lower on the flexion, maybe down to 20. See if that does anything for us. And Control R on that. Okay, so that's a bit of an improvement. It's still a little bit bumpy, but I'm going to leave that as is. So all that's left to do now is to render this out. So go into your render settings. Make sure you set your output to, if you want it to be HD video or animation, 1920 by 1080. We're going to render, how many frames are we going to render? I suppose we go for all frames. It's a lot, 600. So you can render it to as many frames as you like. I'm going to go for 600 frames. Do I even need to actually? Let's see. So let's see what happens. So it falls down. It's doing its thing. It's bouncing up and down. It's still moving. I'm just going to go to a point at which the animation just kind of stops doing anything. So it's still kind of swaying a bit. We're going to go for about here. Now, that's going to be the new all frames. Jump back into your render settings. So we're going to be rendering all frames as far as here. That updated automatically. And that's good for output settings. Go into save, and we can select a destination for this. I'm going to create a new folder, call it sequence. And I'm going to save it as wires. Set this to be a PNG and turn on alpha channel. That way we'll be able to bring this into After Effects if we want to add a background gradient or background color or background image or whatever. Once that's done, then I think we're good to go. I don't think we need to turn on anti-aliasing, because if we do a Control R on this, there's no need for it. There's no jagged reflections or anything like that, so no need for anti-aliasing. That's fine being turned off. And that is it, guys. So once you have all your render settings set up, just go to your render queue, and I'm just going to delete off that one that I made earlier, and let's add this to our render queue. So we want to save that before we make those, or add that to our queue, and then we can render away. So that's going to render away at about, it's looking like, where is it? Yes. So it's rendering away pretty quickly. It's actually rendering about less than a second per frame, so that's pretty good. So guys, that is the end of this tutorial. I hope you learned a lot, as always, and I'll see you in the next video.